All right, peace world. It's Pappy Kamon Freeman, Angry Black Man in Therapy, representing one half of We Act Radio. Happy Indigenous Peoples Day. And we want to make sure that we did not let this day go unannounced. I think in the dismantling of the 500-year-old institution of white supremacy, symbolism is as important as substance. And the symbolism of the only Christopher we acknowledge is Wallace, and dismantling those symbols as in Columbus Day, as the genocide that took place at his so-called discovery. The mere notion that Christopher Columbus discovered America in itself is the cornerstone of white supremacy, because how can you discover something when someone is already there? What you really mean is that he was the first European on record to be there, and therefore is. And so we call that out as acknowledging Indigenous Peoples Day. And it's not just Indigenous Peoples Day in terms of the Native Americans and the Indigenous people throughout the African diaspora, but it's the Indigenous people also in these cities that have been displaced by new settlers, because settlers displaced the natives are not new. All right, having said all that, here to help us unpack some of this stuff and where we go from here and where we've been is a good comrade in the struggle. And I just want to say it's an honor to have him up here. His credentials speak for himself, so let me properly introduce him. Currently, he is the External Relations Officer of Zimbabwe Cuba Friendship Association, U.S. correspondent to the Herald, Zimbabwe's national newspaper, and Southern African Times, co-founder of Mass Emphasis Children History and Theater Company, the Mass Emphasis Positive Action and Creativity Youth Brigade. He's an African history teacher for the last 31 years. He doesn't look like he's much older than 31 years, and he's also an organizer for 31 years. I want to welcome my brother, Obi Ogubuna. And I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly. If not, correct the slave tongue so we can get started.
Obi Egbuna Jr. But it's all good.
No, we're gonna get that guy. We're gonna get that right.
That's part of that's part of the decolonization process. So it's all right.
Absolutely. And we need to call that out, because typically people who come to America, they have been encouraged to simplify their names for the convenience of the ignorance that resides and presides in America, and we're not doing that. We're decolonizing our minds. Free your mind and your ass will follow. So, tell us about what is going on with you, your work on this Indigenous Peoples Day in 2021.
Well, I think it would be only befitting and appropriate to just start with our history of working with the indigenous people. 30 years ago, we were working with the American Indian Movement Grand Governing Council, which is whose history is parallel to the Black Panther Party in this country. So the main things, we marched on the Christopher Columbus statue at Union Station with them. And we were one of the only youth organizations in our community. At that time, I was part of an organization called the Pan-African Student Youth Movement. And we worked with them very closely in dealing with the mascots, formerly the Washington Redskins, currently the Cleveland Indians, and what have you. So they had to organize.
I gotta put a pin right there. Remember when he said, the owner said that they will never change the name. You can put it in all caps.
Yes. And so we were working with them, and they had created a coalition at the time called the National Coalition Against Racism in Sports and Media. So we were working with them as early as 1991. So just to see through their resilience, them continue to fight, and for that to turn into their favor. And at that time, their main targets were the Washington football team, the Cleveland Indians, because if you look at the symbol of Chief Wahoo, it's little black Sambo painted red with a processed hairdo and a bandana on. And of course, they were targeting the Atlanta Braves as well. And the interesting thing is, because when you take a look at the what you see Atlanta Brave fans doing, what you see Florida State Seminole fans doing, that was a beheading ceremony. And this former symbol of the Washington football team was a beheaded indigenous person. So we worked with them on that front. And of course, in 1987, 150 organizations went to Libya to defy Ronald Reagan's travel ban 1 year before the bombing of Libya by the Reagan administration. So on April 15th, and the American Indian Movement Grand Governing Council through their international representative, Vernon Belcourt, known in his community, the Anishinaabe Nation and the Chippewa Nation, Wabunini, who transitioned many years ago now. He and worked very closely with our brother Billy Tyak, who we just lost a few weeks ago. And so they were very involved in Libya work. And when I saw how committed they were to Libya, we were doing that work very early too. So we marched on the White House together with them, dealing with Libya. We marched on the Columbus statue, and we were very supportive of their efforts to dismantle the Columbus statue. And because we understood that was no different than for Africans when you're called a Rhodes Scholar and you know about Cecil John Rhodes and the British South African Company. It was part of the process that Osagyefo Dr. Kwame Nkrumah started when he named the Gold Coast Ghana. And in between 1957 and 1960, when 35 African nations got their independence, one of the first things they would do when they acclaimed the mantle of power was they would change the colonial name to an indigenous name. So the way the Gold Coast became Ghana, Portuguese East Africa became Mozambique, Southwest Africa became Namibia, Southern Rhodesia became Zimbabwe, Northern Rhodesia became Zambia, Upper Volta became Burkina Faso. We could identify with them. The parallel was undeniable. And when you go to war with an enemy as powerful as our enemies are, having alliances, sacred alliances, are the order of the day.
And you have to sanitize the language. You know, that's us, as you just pointed out, as part of the decolonization, how you identify with yourselves. This is something that was preliminary in terms to achieve someone's freedom. I remember them saying, like, during the aggressive decolonization in the continent of Africa. And let me stop there to remind everyone that by and large, most of the boundaries that have been created on a continent is still the direct result of the Berlin Conference. These are boundaries that was created by a colonial structure. And for all intents and purposes, those same colonial powers are the G8 or whatever, you know, powers that are in the world today, which means we are basically operating off the same colonial mentality, the same colonial economic structure. And so therefore the decolonization continues. And right here in America, that's what we're seeing in this power struggle.
Even to use, and as a matter of fact, since we're focusing on Indigenous Peoples Day and the sacred alliance between Africans and Indigenous people, we must stop saying America. When the Democrats say America, that is a white supremacist overture. When the Republicans say America, no, America geographically is the Western Hemisphere. So that's North America, South America, Central America, Latin America, the Caribbean, all the way to Canada. And that's of paramount importance to us as Africans, because when we talk about ourselves, we must make sure that we're talking about the experience of nearly 200 million Africans in this hemisphere. We don't make a distinction between picking cotton in the Carolinas and Maryland and Virginia to chopping tobacco, to cutting sugarcane in Haiti, Cuba, or the Dominican Republic. There are Spanish-speaking Africans in the Americas, there are Portuguese-speaking Africans in the Americas, and there are English-speaking Africans in the Americas, all here for the same reason, kidnapping and displacement. So every time that we say America, we are giving credence and validity to that culture of conquering, domination, and plunder.
And I'm so glad you made that point, because my good friend, Roxanne Lawson, who I met with the American Friends Service Committee when we attended a leadership conference in Nairobi, Kenya, and I spent 6 weeks with her. She would tell me every single time during that summer that America is two continents. The Americas is two continents. It's not just, you know, when you talk about America, the country, you need to be explicit. You need to say the United States of America. You need to be deliberate. And I think that is very important and paramount going forward. So thank you for that correction. And let's walk away with that. That's, you know, for all those that's out now listening voices, let's walk away with that. Let's make a distinction when we referring to what we are talking about, the country of America, as the United States of America, and America itself being the Americas and part of the African diaspora. I think that will lead us towards a greater solidarity. Now, one of the points that I was trying to make earlier, I met a young lady, her name was Rhodesia. and she did not know the significance of her name. And that's not her fault. It's her parents' fault, but as a grown person, she should come across. So how is it that we can personalize, internalize decolonization? What would you say that, because I think some of the work you're doing with the kids might come into play with that. So I'll turn the floor.
That's the only thing I feel qualified to say in relationship to that. We must create more organizational outlets strategically aimed at children. Because of the intensity of the propaganda apparatus of our former colonizers and captors. So targeting children as early as possible. So when we started the Mass Emphasis Children's History and Theater Company back in 2011, 10 years ago, and now we have 25 plays under our belt and 30 performances under our belt. It is for that reason, that's the first thing that we were thinking of. So we, of course, gained our inspiration from something that during Osaji for Dr. Kwame Nkrumah's time in Ghana, they had something called the Young Pioneers Institute. And the great Thomas Sankara in Burkina Faso, he had a 4-year run only, but they were one of the key cornerstones of the revolution there was the pioneers of the revolution. So they use culture to empower the young people. And so that's what we've been doing for the longest. And when you deal with it that way, you are able to give these young people, because all of us, regardless of our spiritual beliefs, regardless of our relationship to the economy, regardless of where we fall politically and intellectually on the spectrum, we're products of our exposure or lack thereof. So if people haven't been exposed to something, you can't hold it against them. So we must intensify the exposure. And we know that if there's a thinner line than the line between love and hate, it's the line between exposure and imposition. So we don't want to force anything on the masses of our people, especially our children, but we want to give them quality exposure to everything under the sun. And if we continue to do that, we'll take care of that.
Absolutely. And so one of the things we want to point out is that the great Nina Simone said that the artist's role, the artist must reflect the times that they live in. She felt that was the meaning of being an artist.
Of course.
So you're rising to that challenge there.
Fine.
Yesterday, and so another powerful warrior that's rising to that challenge is the matriarch, I would like to say, of the critical race theory debate, Nicole Hannah-Jones. I had the pleasure of meeting her yesterday. But Boys and Poets' newest location is in Columbia, Maryland. It's now open. It's their largest location as well. And she was there speaking at a book festival. And there was a Q&A segment after she spoke. And a woman got up and said, how do you propose to teach our young people this type of information when we talk about the institutional white supremacy, we talk about the challenge of decolonization, when we talk about let me share this for those who are not privy, late stage of capitalism, which describes the unrealistic perspectives of the wealthiest 1%, and it highlights how the middle class is largely oblivious to the struggles of the poor, and the sense that monopolies and the oligarchs that run them have rigged the system in their favor. She posed the question about how can we espouse to promote this type of negative aspect of our history and reality to young people when they just want to be free. They just want to be people, you know. And when she posed that question, and I understand that to an extent, because you know how, and you can jump in on your own personal education with your young one, but I haven't given my young person all of the heaviness. I've given them, you know, PG-13 stuff, but I haven't given them heavy yet, and I'm about to, because he's going to turn 13 next year, and that's when it's going to hit for real. But Nicole Hannah-Jones said that, well, she's not qualified to answer this question because her child has been reading slave books since she was 2. Like she's not allowed to watch any depictions of princesses unless that princess looks like her, you know. So she jumped right on it. She said, we don't have the luxury to have our young people unequipped and oblivious to the reality of what's going on, because we want to be nice. The world is not nice. So well, I turn it to you.
It's a question of narrative, and the way we approach our young people, our children, it's a microcosm of how we approach life itself as a people. So if we're continuing from the narrative rooted in victimization, then we have to make the shift to a narrative rooted in resistance. You can even see it if people focus on the most decorated period in our history, the 1960s. They're showing you, if they show you the South, they're showing you being hosed down. They're showing dogs biting you. They're showing the Klan burning crosses on your yard. They're not showing you the 70,000 young people who went to jail dealing with the sit-ins. They're not showing you the 10,000 young people that came to DC in 1959, followed up by 26,000 in 1960, which forced the March on Washington, which had been called for since 1941, but it forced Kennedy got together with the established civil and human rights organizations and wanted to put them in the forefront of that. So if we're going to expose them to a narrative rooted in resistance, which shows our resilience, which shows our dedication, which shows our unwavering commitment to liberation, even if we're not going to live to witness the fruit of that victory, then the children will be just fine. And that's what we've always done from the very beginning. When you take a look at the type of plays that we do, the very last one that we did was in the summertime. We did a play called Y'all Know What I'm Saying, and it was focusing on Paul Robeson and his linguistic brilliance, speaking 20 languages, communicating in up to 30. So the play begins with Jackie Robinson denouncing him before the House of Un-American Activities Committee, and then Paul Robeson expressing his displeasure in that. And then we have a poem of our own called We All Love Our Mother. So one child gets up and recites it in Mugamo, which is a Cameroonian language. Another child recites it in Igbo, a Nigerian language. Another child recites it in Amharic, an Ethiopian language. Another child recites it in Kiswahili, a language spoken in Tanzania, Kenya, Uganda, Rwanda, South Africa. And then a child reciting it in Spanish so that it could resonate with our children in Cuba, our children in the Dominican Republic, our children in Peru, our children in Ecuador, where Africans are to the Spanish speaking. And then of course we ended it with the original English version that we wrote about 11 years ago. So that was one of the ways that we approached that. So it's not a problem. And one of the most beautiful characteristics of history itself is the challenges that it provides. So whether we're either going to embrace the challenges or submit to the enemy because we can't deal with the intensity of the challenges.
Okay. All right. Hey, say that again, brother. Put some paint where it ain't. Say that one again. That line that's a hip hop quote right there.
Okay. No, I was saying you're either going to accept the challenges that the enemy provides, overcome each and every one of them, or submit to them, capitulate, backtrack, compromise, everything that we stand for, everything about us that is strong. So as long as the African fighting spirit guides us, and that spirit is in all of us, and as long as we make that the cornerstone of our narrative, then we should be okay. I think we'll be fine. I'm more optimistic each day that I get up.
And I too as well. I think it's an exciting time to be alive. The last speech by Martin Luther King, so many people are familiar with, but his next to his last speech was given right here in Washington, D.C. It was entitled Remaining Awake During a Great Revolution. He goes on to say that far too often people find themselves living in periods of great social change, but yet they fail to develop the new ideas, new mental responses that the new situation demands. They end up sleeping through a revolution. So when you say we're moving from a narrative of victimization to liberation and resistance and resiliency and celebrating those aspects, I think that's going to get us closer to where we need to be and answering the call.
And Osajifo, Dr. Kwame Nkrumah has the definition of revolution we like to use. He says a revolution is not just a revolt against an old order, but a contest for a new order. Many of those amongst us can tell you what they're fighting for, but they can't tell you what fighting against, but they can't tell you what they're fighting for. They were against Trump, but for Biden. What's the difference there?
What's the difference?
Yeah, so the thing is,
because I want to give ammunition to our enemies. When we say what's the difference, we're talking about what's the qualitative difference, okay?
Exactly.
Not the symbolic difference, not the surface difference. It hasn't changed foreign policy. It hasn't changed the living conditions of the masses of people in this country. We're just seeing the HBCU budget go from $45 billion as it was promised to them to $2 billion. All right, so that has not been a fundamental change between their agenda and the current one. And when we look at the conditions of people on the border, they haven't changed at all as well.
No, and once again, like we said, I mean, it's what people are focusing on right now. And at this particular time, I mean, the gap between the wealthy and the poor is wider than it's ever been in the existence of humanity. Mm-hmm. So you have 1,775 billionaires, according to Forbes magazine, who are worth $13 trillion. And
Last
on the
statement.
other, yeah, and then you have 700 million, 784 million people who live on $1.90 a day or less, and that's considered extreme poverty. And of that 784 million, 400 million of them are in Mother Africa. Of the 25 poorest nations in the world, 22 of them are African nations. The only 3 that are not are the Solomon Islands, Afghanistan, and Haiti. Listen to the nations. And if you walk through Haiti and you didn't know where you were, you think you were in Burkina Faso, you think you were in Namibia. And so it's one of those things where the only thing that the US-born African can fall back on is you're the most comfortable poor person in the world. You're the most comfortably dehumanized person in the world. So if you consider being exploited comfortably a step in the right direction, then you should be just fine. But for those of us who are not satisfied, uncomfortable, and are always identified with genuine resistance in every corner of the world, because we consider Africa our primary focus, as this is Indigenous Peoples Day. We're indigenous to Africa. Africa's not our throne. Africa's our home. Whether you have been in Australia all your life, where we've been for 80,000 years, whether you're in India today, where it's 160 million of us, whether you're in Pakistan, where it's 88 million of us, whether you're in Brazil, where it's 90 million of us, whether you're in Nigeria, where it's 200 million of us, the one place on earth that we all can identify with, whether we were born there or not, is Mother Africa. And as Osagyefo Dr. Kwame Nkrumah said, and I feel very comfortable saying this on an Indigenous Peoples Day, I'm not an African because I was born in Africa. I'm an African because Africa was born inside of me. So if you were born in the diaspora, you have just as much of a right to say that you're indigenous to Africa as someone who's been in Africa their whole life and ain't going nowhere no time soon. So and it's very important to state that today, because we tell you all there's too much plantation love at a moment that there should be no more plantation love. And we have not gained any traction, any leverage from the amputated narrative of the African experience. And the Democrats and the Republicans keep trying to use every institution available to them, every outlet available to them, to impose that amputated narrative of the African experience. History obligates you to give it back to them so we can move forward.
Mm-hmm. And what people need to understand is that the colonial mentality is actually a destructive force within the groups themselves, because the power structure uses that to fight amongst themselves, whether over resources, whether it was a block, whatever ignorant carrot that they offer to them. We need to understand that. So when we talk about violence in these communities, that's a direct result of the colonial mentality, that they're fighting amongst themselves, but they're not challenging the system that is actually oppressing them.
Our main problem with the violence is the target of it, because if it's the correct target, then it's genuine resistance. If I target the police, as opposed to taking the guns that they put in our communities to kill each other, then they're going to have the problem, not me. If we tell the military that our war is not in Cuba, our war is not in Zimbabwe, our war is not in Venezuela, our war is in Chicago, our war is in Baltimore, our war is in Denver, our war is in conjunction and solidarity with other Africans and oppressed people all over the world, then they're going to have the problem. So it's just a question of how you look at yourself and who you target and what have you. And but even though Amilcar Cabral says that struggle is daily action against the enemy and daily action against ourselves, he's definitively clear. They were Kenyans that fought with the Mau Mau, the Land and Freedom Army that liberated Kenya from British colonialism. They were Kenyans who fought with the King's African Rifles, who fought with the British. They were Zimbabweans that fought with ZANU and ZAPU, the liberation movements. They were Zimbabweans that fought with the Rhodesians in their special police services. They were Africans that ran on the Underground Railroad. There were Africans that would go and tell the plantation owners who was running, what Harriet Tubman looked like, how she would come on the plantations dressed as an old woman seeking to lure our people. There are Africans in Cuba that are fighting with Biden for regime change, and there are Africans in Cuba that are just like Jose Aponte, who led the first rebellion of captives in Cuba, just like Antonio Maceo, who the Honorable Marcus Mosiah Garvey named one of the Black Star Line after, just like Comandante Victor Drake, just like Nicholas Guillen, the first poet of their revolution, who they called the Langston Hughes of Cuba. So they're Africans who are part of the resistance. They're Africans who are part of the efforts to smash the resistance, destroy the resistance, compromise the resistance, betray the resistance. It's a question of how you look at yourself. Do you identify with your resistance, or do you identify with your oppressor? And there's no middle ground.
No middle ground. All right, there we go. No sellout and fuck Kanye West. All right. I want to give a shout out talking about resistance in this protracted struggle that we are in the midst of. You can stop evictions. They're having eviction prevention training this Saturday, October 16th, which is the anniversary of not only the Million Man March, the largest political gathering in the history of the city. Almost 2 million men was there. No incidents whatsoever. Can you imagine if Million Man March looked more like January 6th?
and not only that, but the fact that in addition, because we had the honor of working on the National Youth Organizing Committee. So while there were 2 million Africans that gathered in Washington, assembled in Washington, there were millions of us that did not go to school, that did not go to work, because when we took on that responsibility, we were looking at positive action and how that has always served us well. So we were taking a look at what they did in Ghana to wrestle power away from the colonial authorities, what Nkrumah did, what Lumumba and the Congolese National Movement did in the Congo, what Ahmed Sékou Touré and the Democratic Party of Guinea did in Guinea, what a 25-year-old Muammar Gaddafi did with the September Revolution in 1969, 1 month before I was born. So we were looking at all of these different things so that we could show people that when we have, there's nothing, because many of our people, they have a problem with marching and a problem with demonstrating. It is the objectives of our march, the agenda of our march, if it's authentically ours, and how we're going to follow up after we have marched. That's the only problem with marches. Because, for example, if we accept this narrative, that if we reject the amputated narrative of the African experience, and every time we march in Washington, we know that Africans are going to march in Ghana on the U.S. Embassy, march in Zimbabwe on the U.S. Embassy, march in Cuba on the U.S. Embassy. Africans everywhere are going to march on them at the same time. There would be no problem with that. So it's just a question of us understanding that our value, understanding our connections, and making sure that our activity reflects that. Having no problem whatsoever understanding that every time we go to the streets, we're on a collision course with those who are in power. But that's if you're fighting for power. But if you only want that seductive appetizer called justice, then you're going to stop. You're not going to go all the way. You're going to put the brakes on and encourage others to put the brakes on. But we're not putting the brakes on anymore.
And we've seen that happen. What you just said, the seductive elixir called justice, because when the first campaign I worked on was the Free Mumia Abu Jamal campaign. Note, it says Free Mumia Abu Jamal campaign. And at the time he was on death row. And when they commuted his sentence from death row to life, it split the group. It split the movement. It split the support he had, because now it's no longer a death penalty case. So the people that was there primarily for the death penalty part of that case say, "Oh, we won. We saved his life." Like, no, he's unjustly incarcerated. He should be free. And that's how insidious the system is, that people need to understand how they really truly get down. Okay, so I want to make sure that we also point out that October 16th is also the anniversary of Harper's Ferry. The greatest white man of the United States of America ever produced was John Brown. And he is the man who is most singularly responsible for the first Civil War. And so he got down on October 16th. So we want to throw that out there too. But this October 16th, this Saturday at 1 p.m., you can do something for the eviction moratorium crisis, where they're threatening to evict 1 out of 6 renters, not only in this city, but also in this country. And if you don't have a problem with the fact that billionaires doubled their net worth, their entire net worth in 16 months, but at the same time will stand by and watch 1 out of 6 renters evicted at no fault of their own, because this system refuses to acknowledge the struggle between capitalism and democracy. You can do something. That is this Saturday, October 16th at Malcolm X Park, 1 p.m. That's brought to you by Cancel the Rent. You can go back to our Facebook page for more information. It's Cancel the Rent. It's eviction prevention training, because we're encouraging people to intervene in evictions. That means do something. And that's what we're here about. We're here to get into good trouble. And this is about civil disobedience, and we all need to rise to occasion and do something. Now, I wanted to point out some of the comments that we have here, Brother Obi. I don't know if you can see the comments.
Yeah,
here.
I can see them.
I want to address Bianca, Bianca Skirmia. She says, if anyone needs assistance, okay, well, she's talking about rental assistance. Thank you, Bianca. I was referring to her previous statement. She says that over 70 people arrested outside the White House. Peaceful land and water protectors threatened with LRAD. I don't know what exactly that is. If you do know, or Bianca, share that with us. LRAD, sonic weapons. I'm assuming that's what you're referring to. Where were the sonic weapons on January 6th? How many insurrections were arrested on January 6th? I'm gonna turn this over to you, but let me first say that I was present on June 1st when they did the attack on the peaceful protesters for Trump to do his photo op, and these weapons were used there. They didn't use the sonic, but they had rubber bullets, they had grenades, the flashbang grenades. They had projectile tear gas canisters. I was actually hit by a tear gas projectile canister. I saw someone beaten with batons. Journalists was beaten, and this was on June 1st. They had the Bureau of Prisons out there, because DC has more police than any other city in the United States of America.
Surveillance capital of the world.
Yeah, and there was full force on June 1st, but on January 6th, because of the colonial economic structure, the relationship with DC with the United States of America federal government, they are not, DC Muriel Bowser is not able to call the National Guard. Only Trump could call the National Guard, and he wasn't going to call it on himself. And that's why they was undermanned. The Capitol Police was undermanned. It was deliberately, it was a setup for them to intervene in the count of that election. And the fact that we haven't done a thorough investigation of that, the fact that Joe Biden is not fighting for a thorough investigation of that, makes them all complicit. So I turn it over to you. She was talking about the 70 people that was arrested out of the White House and how they was attacked with sonic weapons. Sounds just like what was that, when the Native Americans, the indigenous people, was trying to protect their water rights, and they was trying to bring the South Dakota pipeline in. They was doing the same type of tactics. Mamuna Youssef was there, did a wonderful report for us. But I turn it over to you, just a juxtaposition of the responses that we seeing for all the other people and the response that they received on January 6th.
Well, I think that one of the most important things that people need to be paying attention to right now is how both sides of the spectrum, considered extreme on both sides. The extreme right is duplicating the activities of the extreme left. In 1954, someone who inspired Assata Shakur, a Puerto Rican warrior named Lolita Lebron, and a few other Puerto Rican comrades stormed the Capitol and fired in the Capitol, and calling for the independence of Puerto Rico. When the Ku Klux Klan wants to be heard today, they don't burn the crosses on our yards in the South. They march on Washington, D.C. So the fact that the extreme right is using the strategies and tactics of what has been synonymous with the extreme left, I think that that's the most important thing. And the reason I say that is because we shouldn't be expected to be treated favorably when we're intensifying our resistance. Whatever happens to us comes with the territory. So, but I understand people's motives to magnify the contradictions, so we won't tell people how to do that. I think that right now, the most important thing is to focus on the things that people divert attention away from. So, for example, for us, every time, understanding that we live in the police surveillance capital of the world, we see more police in Washington than people will see in a lifetime if they live anywhere else. We now even have library police, we have public transportation police, Capitol Hill police, park police with no jurisdiction. The main fear that they have is when we rise up against the police. They have two. Number one, they're going to come to the conclusion that we did in the 60s and in the 90s in particular, where we said that the movement against naked police terrorism is inextricably linked to the foreign policy of the United States. We must stop them from policing the world. You can even see at Colin Kaepernick's first press conference that he had, the first thing they asked him, they weren't even concerned about what he was saying about the police. They wanted to know, was he talking about the military? And of course, he said the military keeps him safe and what have you. And so it's very important for us to understand. So for those of us, when we were in the streets in the 1990s, when we shut DC down, we let it be known that it was in conjunction with the military regimes in Africa that were being overthrown. Mengistu was shown the door in Ethiopia and Eritrea. Abacha and Babangida was shown the door in Nigeria. Mobutu, the godfather of military neocolonialism, was shown the door in the Congo. So any efforts of ours in Washington have to be that spread that far. So while people were focusing on that, what we were focusing on from last year and are still focusing on right now is fighting for Cuban medical personnel to gain access to the United States so that they can effectively present methods and tools and resources to eradicate the corona pandemic, as they have emerged as being at the forefront of that fight. They have 57 brigades in 40 nations right now. They're the only country in Latin America to create a vaccine manufacturer, and they have created 4 vaccinations in the last 15 months. Sovereign 1, Sovereign 2, Abdisa, and Mambisa and Abdallah. And the last one that they created, Abdallah, has a 92.8% effectiveness rate. And that is part and parcel of our struggle of when we created the National Medical Association in 1896, because we couldn't join the American Medical Association. It's the one thing that Booker T. Washington and Du Bois agreed on was health. Du Bois did a sociological study called the Physique of the health of the Negro American. And before Booker T. Washington left us, he started Negro Health Week. So what we're saying is that, so for all the young people, we need to send them to Cuba to study medicine. So for every George Floyd, for every Deontay, yeah, so the program is $250,000. It's a $250,000 scholarship. You study at the Latin American School of Medical Sciences for 6 years on the condition that you will return to the poorest parts of Buffalo, the poorest parts of Baltimore, the poorest parts of Chicago, the poorest parts of Mississippi, the poorest parts of Alabama, and practice there. So for every George Floyd, a Daniel Hale Williams, for every Tamir Rice, a Charles Drew, for every Sandra Bland or Barbara Justice, for every, I mean, the list is endless. For every Philander Castile, a Ernest Everett Just. So this is what we're talking about. So and in addition to that, the blockade against Cuba is an extension of that policing as it goes into its 59th year. So the fight against police terrorism in Washington, all over the United States, is connected to the struggle to end the blockade on Cuba, to lift the sanctions on Zimbabwe, to lift the sanctions on Venezuela, to lift the sanctions on Eritrea. The Biden administration's #1 aim is to police the world. So when Barack Obama told you that he shed a tear for Trayvon Martin, but you know that bombing Libya for 6 months in a row left a whole trail of dead Libyan children younger than Trayvon Martin, Trayvon Martin's exact age, a few years older than him, you know how fraudulent the narrative is. So if you're saying that it's okay for them to stop policing you within North American borders, but you will be an accomplice in the policing of Africa, a policing of the Caribbean, a policing of Latin America, then the only thing you're saying is you just want to decide who the handcuffs should be put on. You want to decide who's lynched. You want to play a role in that. So if you embrace the legacy of Colin Powell, if you embrace the legacy of the Buffalo Soldiers, if you embrace the legacy of the Tuskegee Airmen, that puts you on a collision course with every African on the planet that is in tune with their African fighting spirit. I say that on Indigenous Peoples Day. So it's very important for us to understand what we are fighting for as much as we're talking about what we're fighting against. And even when we talk about being anti-war, We're not necessarily anti-war. We celebrate Eritrea fighting for 30 years. We celebrate Zimbabwe defeating the British in the 14-year struggle. We celebrate what Angola, Guinea-Bissau, and Mozambique did to the Portuguese. We celebrate that because that was defense. But what we do not celebrate, and because every time that we march against the police, they intensify their recruitment efforts. All of our young people, taking us back to young people, brother, come on, they put more dollars in their STEM programs. And for those of you who have your children in STEM programs, if you're not educating your children, guess what? When they get old enough, they're going to be working for Homeland Security. The FBI are going to be the beneficiaries of their excellence. The CIA are going to be the beneficiaries of their excellence. The Navy, the Air Force, the Marines are going to be the beneficiaries of their excellence, not us, who they're obligated by history to serve.
There you have it. And I want to pick up where you left off. We just got a few minutes left in the program, but I got some housekeeping we got to do. But before I do that, I want to make sure that this point was made clear to our listening audience that Cuba has medical breakthroughs that are not allowed to be accessed in the U.S. markets and other places around the world that is following the blockade set up by America for the past
only two nations are following it: the United States and the real nation's capital, the Zionist state of Israel. That's why we are saying yes, and that's why we are saying that as there's a growing outcry that the African Union should strip Israel of its observer status, which they gave them. But it doesn't just stop there. 46 nations in Africa have diplomatic ties with Israel. And I'm not just saying this because of our solidarity with the Palestinian people. The fact that Israel was the only nation to stand up in the UN and refused to acknowledge Algeria's independence, Tunisia's independence, their bombing of Kemet in 1967 during the Six-Day War, being the only nation to support apartheid in what's called South Africa, to support apartheid in Namibia, to support apartheid in Mozambique, and to support apartheid in Zimbabwe. And by them being the only other nation in favor of the blockade on Cuba, it shows you that everywhere Africans are on the planet striving, Israel is going to attempt to stand in our way. And when Israel stood up against the blockade, all we had to say to them was Adolf Hitler would have been proud. Because when you look at what Golda Meir has done, when you look at what Menachem Begin has done, when you look at what Ben Gurion did, when you look at what Netanyahu was doing, they are just as vicious as Hitler, if not more vicious. So while they vilified Hitler, they should stand right next to Hitler. That's where they deserve to be in history. So they are the enemies of the African, they are the enemies of the Palestinian, they are the enemies of the oppressed. And as the Native American said, as this is Indigenous Peoples Day, as that great freedom fighter Wabu Enini said, we are the Palestinians and the Palestinians are us.
Absolutely. On this Indigenous Peoples Day 2021. We have some housekeeping here. We got to give a shout out to Whitman Walker. We want our listening audience to mark your calendars wherever you are, not only in the DMV area, but around this country that's going through decolonization right now and around the world. Mark your calendars for Whitman Walker's 35th annual Walk and 5K to End HIV on Saturday, October the 23rd, this 2021. You can register online wherever you are at walktoendhiv.org. That's walktoendhiv.org. This is the 35th Walk and 5K to End HIV. Whitman Walker Health, End HIV, ensure equality, fight racism, love openly, and save lives. Do something. Walk, run, or donate today at walktoendhiv.org. Okay, now I want people to understand on this Cuba situation, and I had the pleasure of spending some time in Cuba. Thank you to Mr. Shalal from Busboys and Poets for sponsoring my trip. Thank you to the Code Pink Women Against War for allowing me to join their delegation. This predated Mira Bowser's trip to Cuba, or even Obama's trip to Cuba, I'm proud to say. And we was treated like dignitaries while we was there. And there's two things I want to share with our listening audience. Some of them are friends and some of them are not. To both of those groups, need to understand that every time you see someone get their foot amputated as a complication of diabetes in the United States of America, it is a direct result of their refusal to allow the medicine that Cuba that prevents that. That is a barbaric practice, is unheard of in the country of Cuba. They have diabetes treatment programs that will eliminate that. So every single time a loved one's foot is amputated in the United States of America due to complications of diabetes, that is a business decision. That is a political decision. How so? Because I asked the U.S. ambassador myself in our meeting that why won't they allow that medicine to reach these shores? And he says because they are protecting their business interests. They make more money doing those surgeries than they would for the medicines to prevent those. And that is the sickness when you compare capitalism, profit at all costs, and it subjugated to an industry like healthcare, because we have confused healthcare with health insurance. And the last thing I would say, in that same meeting, he said to me that if you're looking for consistency in American foreign policy, I'm afraid you will never find it. And so I just want to put that out there.
Actually, yeah, no, I would say real quickly, I disagree with that because they've maintained this blockade for 59 years. So they're consistently genocidal, they're consistently racist, they're consistently terroristic. 635 assassination attempts on the life of Comandante Fidel Castro, which means 635 times he was supposed to end up like Malcolm, end up like Martin, end up like Medgar. So they've been very consistent. We have to be, exactly. So we have to be consistent. So we must make sure, because if we get the blockade on Cuba lifted, that means that they're not going to be able to use sanctioning anymore, because Eritrea will follow. And remember, you talked about President Obama when at his first inauguration, he said the might of our military must be matched by the strength of our diplomacy. So what that means is, even though their preference is to bomb, even though their preference is to assassinate leaders who don't submit to them, even though their preference is to maim and to cripple and to terrorize, if they have to starve a people to death to make a point politically, they have no problem doing that. So the fact that Cuba has lost nearly $150 billion since the blockade was imposed by Kennedy in 1962, which falls on the heels of a failed invasion called the Bay of Pigs invasion. So this week, Brother Kamon, we're putting out a statement that we demand that the Biden administration gives restitution, repair, and redemption to Cubans in defense of their national sovereignty. And we didn't want to use the word reparations because we're 20 years removed from the the UN conference on racism, xenophobia, and other related intolerances in Durban. And the Bush administration, for those who remember, said they would boycott the meeting if Palestine was on the agenda, if reparations was on the agenda, and our kidnapping and displacement was on the agenda, what is commonly referred to as chattel slavery. And Comandante Fidel Castro came and gave the best speech of any head of state, and he said he recognized reparations not only for Africans in the United States, but all over the Americas, which represents that displacement from Mother Africa. So, and in the last few years, they have used that language. When President Obama took his high-profile field trip to Cuba, because that's all it was, that's all it was. He said, Comandante Raul Castro said, we want reparations for the damages of the blockade. So right now, every organization in our community that supports reparations, you should want reparations for Africans in Cuba and the indigenous people in Cuba because of the damages that the blockade has caused. Because when you look at it, the resources will go towards their healthcare program, where they have the lowest HIV/AIDS rate in the world, the most advanced gerontology program in the world. That means taking care of the elderly, for those of you who don't know. And since you always speak out against gentrification, they take care of the elderly in Cuba. They don't tear down old folks home and turn them into Java juices. Exactly. So the resources would go towards their project with Venezuela called Operation Project Miracle, aimed at eradicating blindness in the Americas. What we are also going to be doing is we are pushing with more people going to Africa than ever before. The example we can use is Ghana. We are going to Ghana now like gamblers go to Atlantic City and Las Vegas, which is fine. But we are saying that there are 4,000 Cuban doctors stationed throughout the African continent. We should begin to create a technical base for them so we can provide them with material support. So if they need stethoscopes in Ghana, if they need x-ray machines in Ghana, if they need that in Nigeria, if they need that in Eritrea, if they need that in the Congo, if they need that in Zimbabwe, they should know that Africans in the diaspora who are looking to invest in the reversal of colonization in Africa, to break the trend that we talked about earlier. That's what we're calling for right now. So you're going to be hearing a lot about the work that we've been doing.
And we look to do more.
And our children did a documentary last year called Get Out of Cuba's Way, calling for the Henry Reeve Medical Brigade to be allowed to come to United States borders. And it took these children 8 minutes and 32 seconds to do this, less time than it took the terrorist police to snuff the life of George Floyd. So while the police use their time to take life, we're going to use our time to amplify and intensify our genuine resistance and stand with those who are deserving of it based on what they have proven through service, not rhetoric and lip service.
So here you go. Wow, this is powerful. This is beautiful. And we want to have to bring you back, and we want to be a more consistent ally in the work that you're doing. I'm making a personal and public commitment that we're going to do all I can to promote young people in the United States of America going to Cuba to study medicine.
The phone number is 212-926-5757. 212-926-5757. The organization is called IFCO, and it's in New York. And you contact Gail Walker. She's the director of that program, to see if you have young children who are eligible. I cannot leave without saying to you, if you're interested in your children joining the Mass Emphasis Children's History and Theater Company, you have to be between the ages of 5 and 18. You can definitely do that. If there are people that are going to be seeing this nationally, if you have a theater company that is very similar to, we didn't get a chance to really talk specifically about some of the plays we've done. We'll do that next time. But some of them have been Araminta and Samora, Treating the Sick, Liberating the Oppressed, which showed the parallels between the life of Harriet Tubman and Samora Machel, Mozambique's first president. We mentioned the one we did about Paul Robeson. In December of last year, we did one called The Kiswahili Explosion. It was our first play in another language. The whole play is in Kiswahili. We had a play called In Memory of Kwame Nkrumah and Thomas Sankara. We've done a play called Same Neighborhood, Different Perspectives, a conversation between General Colin Powell and Kwame Ture. We've done three Zimbabwean plays, Sally Mugabe Lives Forever, The Yinga Yinga and the Bush, about the man who led the guerrilla struggle in Zimbabwe, Josiah Tongogara. The other play was about their Heroes Acre, where all the heroes of the revolution are buried. We did a play called Cuba's Greatest Army, a tribute to the Cuban doctors, and it looks like Mass Emphasis is going to be the first children's outlet to have a children's exchange with Cuba through the La Colmanita, which is their national children's theatric ensemble. So those are some of the plays that we've done. So we're looking to partner with other outlets all over the country.
Brother, your work is prolific, and I salute you for your tenacity, and that's just as
and we salute you for yours as well. We salute you for yours as well. Thank you.
I'm gonna go on a little tangent right here, but if you could take a moment and put it into the chat, the access for the medicine program in Cuba, and also your organization for the Young People's Theater, and let's wrap this up. Shameless self-promotion. Who else would love to see the media relentlessly question Senator Manchin and Senator Sinema about their oil and pharma donors? All right, we need to call that out. Joe Biden needs to take them out to the woodshed. They're not willing to do that because they are only practicing unrestrained capitalism, which is the cornerstone of most of the problems that we see around the world today. And until we call that out, we're going to continue to get more of the same. So I want to put that out there. So I want people to talk about, well, it ain't Joe Biden's fault. Yes, it is, because he hasn't called them out for what they truly are. And until he does that, we're going to continue to get more of the same. All right. Now, one of the things here, we at Radio DC's independent broadcast station on the radical side of Martin King Avenue, the Unabettered Nation's capital, foothill to Cedar Hill, the line of Anacostia, Frederick Douglass home. We like to make alliances with independent media and independent artists and independent film. And today at 6 o'clock, there's going to be a great film at Busboys and Poets in Anacostia. For those in our immediate area, you can go to Busboys and Poets Anacostia today, October 11th, Indigenous People Day at 6 p.m. for the Kumina Queen official. It's Kumina Queen, and it's the official trailer is on our Facebook page today if you want to check it out. It talks about the power of the drum It talks about how music drives movements, how our culture drives policy and politics, and where we are around the world in the African diaspora. And I will be there myself. Looking forward to seeing that film. And then on this week, on the 13th, we have another indie film partnership. This one is on a sour note. This is addressing sex offenders and sex trafficking. This is a problem not only in our community but around the world. The film is called Fishnets. This outdoor screening will be held again this Wednesday at 7 p.m. October the 13th. Shout out to my mom. It's her birthday, October 13th. To all the moms out there and all the Libras out there. And tomorrow is Baba Dick Gregory's anniversary of his birth. We want to shout him out as well. And again, Council to Rent, political training, direct intervention training this Saturday, October 16th, the anniversary of John Brown, Harper's Ferry, and a Million Man March at Malcolm X Park at 1 o'clock, counciltorent.org. All right, that's it for me. I leave the last word to you, but I got to hit you with the question. Do you believe that we're living in the midst of a great revolution?
I believe that those who are on the path of revolution are on the path of revolution. The only challenge we have is to distinguish revolution from reform. But with that being said, there's certain activity rooted in reform that can advance revolution. So we know that fighting against the blockade on Cuba is going to advance revolution. Fighting against the sanctions on Zimbabwe is going to advance revolution. Fighting to smash police terrorism, but merging it with the struggle to stop U.S. genocidal foreign policy, European Union genocidal foreign policy, creating organizational outlets aimed at the decolonization process. That's going to intensify revolution. And once again, we use Osaje for Dr. Kwame Nkrumah's definition. A revolution is not just a revolt against an old order, but a contest for a new order. So we want the total liberation and unification of Mother Africa, one unified socialist Africa, one unified socialist African planet, where the most exploited people on the earth, who happen to be products of the most wealthy nation on earth, are finally beneficiaries of it. And we share the wealth of that nation, and we liberate both the human resource so we can properly utilize the material resources. So as long as that's the case, we'll be okay. We will be fine, even if we don't live to witness victory. And all that would mean is you would be in the same company with Amilcar Cabral, doing more to smash Portuguese colonialism than anyone, but not living to see Guinea-Bissau liberated. You would be like Josiah Tongogara, doing more than anyone to liberate Zimbabwe, but not living to see the flag go up. Being like Medgar Evers, doing more than anyone to get Africans the right to vote, but didn't get a chance to see the Voting Rights Act passed. So we never allow pursuit of victory to stop us because we may not have the privilege of witnessing victory. Kwame Ture told me a long time ago when I was 20 years old, witnessing victory is a privilege some of our most noble fighters were never afforded.
There it is. And before we get out of here, this is WEAC Radio. We do shout outs, and we want to make sure you give the correct pronunciation of your decolonized title for our listening audience and the host as well.
Obi Egbuna Jr. Obi-Egbuna. If we were in Nigeria, though, they would say Ebuna. But because of the pronunciation dynamic, Egbuna is fine. I always joke with people, 3 syllables like Nkrumah, 3 syllables like Lumumba. So, I mean, or Mandela. So it's very easy for people to pronounce if they consider it worthy of the proper pronunciation. And of course, when it comes to something indigenous, as this is Indigenous Peoples Day, we shouldn't have a dismissive attitude about when we're trying to be true to who we are.
Exactly. Any shout outs, brother?
Shout outs to the children of Mother Africa, suffering, and scattered all over the world, but are maintaining resiliency no matter what against all challenges that come their way. And so for me, that's how I was always shout out. Shout out to resistance. Shout out to countless drops of blood. Shout out to countless drops of sweat, which represent the labor of the most consistent servants that our struggle has produced, who are responsible for us occupying the capacity that we occupy at this exact historical moment.
There we have it. And our shout outs will go to our underwriter Social Security Works. Shout out to Act TV, our media partner. Shout out to Tom Hartman, our #1 progressive talk show host in America. And shout out to RJ Richard Escal, the 0 Hour, which is our largest syndicated program here on WEAC Radio. And finally, a shout out to, again, Whitman Walker Health and HIV, ensure equality, fight racism, love openly, save lives. Don't miss the 35th Walk and 5K to End HIV, October 23rd. And you can go to walktoendhiv.org. Obi, much love, much revolutionary love and solidarity.
Thank you. And I hope what we shared today met your expectations as a host and for your listeners as well. We thank you.
Expectations, and you just got me on the hook because now I have to be more consistent in our support of you and your work. So I'm making that commitment to you here today, personally and publicly. All right.
Thank you.
Stay safe, stay strong, stay woke. WEAC Radio, do something.
All right.